Al, this is an interesting season, in any way to be talking about missional engagement and church mergers and all that stuff. And I would imagine that, just from my own experience and from chatting with other church leaders, and not just pastors, but just also leadership in general, that there's a lot of discouragement. I'm curious to know, how have you strengthened yourself in this season and continued this sort of conversation, with your own church leaders, and how have you found ways that they can also be strengthened? How have, together as leadership, how can leaders find ways to be strengthened in this season and continue these kinds of conversations?
Yeah. So yeah, I think one of the things that I've felt really convicted in the last little while, probably the last few years, is really to develop something called the rule of life. A rule of life is something that monks and monastic communities have done for 1500 years. And so it's basically a pattern of Christian practices, right? Practices such as prayer and silence and solitude and Sabbath and fasting. And the purpose of the rule of life is basically to provide a pattern to shape our lives, right? It's about developing habits that make us better followers of Jesus. In fact, one of the things that we've been saying around the tap is to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did. To be with Jesus, spend time with him with these practices, and we slowly become like Jesus. We abide in him and through the Spirit. And then we begin to do what Jesus did. So that's sort of been this thing that we've been on, and something that we really want to do more so of. And so one of the things at the tap is our kind of vision is we want to make disciples that make disciples that make disciples. And the beginning of this year, I kind of tweaked it for the staff and the elders. And we want to be a church that make disciples in the way of Jesus through these habits and practices, that make disciples in the way of Jesus, and so forth and so forth. Because Jesus often retreated to a quiet place, he prayed, he memorized scripture. And I have to admit, it's hard. Like, I don't know about you, and I admit as a pastor, that's something hard to admit. But yeah, it's hard for me to carve out time and to read scripture and to fast and to take breaks. And, I'm a bit of a goer person. And it's been hard for me these last few years. But then the pandemic hit. And obviously the pandemic has caused this obvious, disruption in my life. But it also brought this newfound opportunity, an opportunity to discover new rhythms in my life, so I can be deeply into these habits. So I've begun taking these long walks. I began to fast. I began to be very deliberate about scripture reading and doing, consolation, desolation in the evening. And I took Sabbath on Sundays because we record on Wednesdays. When was the last time I took Sabbath on a Sunday, really? Is amazing. So I think it's in these past few months where I've developed these rhythms during this pandemic, which has actually given me the gift of time, that I begin to notice that these habits do begin to shape my thoughts and my actions. And they help me actually to turn off the noise around me and enabled me to hear God better. To develop these habits, these spiritual disciplines, has really helped me. And it's something that I've been trying to encourage my staff to write out a rule of life, to be really engaged in it. Because how do we provide? How do we care? How do we spiritually care and discern and listen to God during this time if we're not actually spending time with Jesus, if we don't have these habits? So I really feel like more and more as this pandemic gets longer, the more we actually need to concentrate on these habits, or we just get lost in all of this. Two resources that have really helped me, and they're kind of two books that you have to read one after the other, and Fred knows this already. But the first one is John Mark Comer's book, right? The Relentless Elimination of Hurry. A lot of people have read it. But after you read it to kind of show why we need these habits, then you read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, because it gives you practical ways of which you can actually put these habits into practice in your life. So read John Mark Comer first, then read James Clear, and that's the beginning of getting these habits in your life. And yeah, it's a game changer. A Rule of Life. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And I want to echo the ruthless elimination of hurry. That's a book that's been shaping my family and I. So it's a great resource if you haven't encountered that one yet.